Lovely. Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to the Royal Society of Edinburgh and welcome to this event, Shaping the Feminist City. Thank you for battling through the weather and rush hour to get here. We really, really appreciate it. I'm Jude Barber. I'm an architect and director at Collective Architecture, and we're thrilled that so many of you joined tonight, not just here in person, but also online. So welcome to those of you that are joining us. We've been really pleased with the interest in tonight's event, and particularly those of you at home as well that are listening in. So I think everyone makes this joke, but it's just obviously a lot of curiosity around the subject, so that's really, really good. So, you know, we're really delighted to have such a great panel with us here today. We'll talk about that in a second. We've also got Suzanne Ewing, Holly Bruce, and May East. So we're really looking forward to tonight's conversation.
Thank you. And just to echo what Judah said, I'm so excited to have everyone, so excited to have this conversation here. I'm Daisy Narayanan. Like Jude, I'm a fellow of the RSE. And in my day job, I am the Public Realm Director for the Crown Estate. So again, thank you for being here. And I hope everyone's comfortable and sitting back, and those watching online, hello and welcome as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. The RSE's fire and safety evacuation procedure is to assemble outside the dome, leaving the building the way you all just came in. The fire exit routes are on the current slide. There you go, right on cue, but please follow the curious staff. They're there at the back. They'll give you a little wave if you look back. Just follow them in case there is an evacuation. We're not expecting an alarm, but in case there is an alarm, just please follow them. Yeah, but for now, I hope you're all comfortable and ready for a really lively and interesting discussion.
And just to, sorry, we're going to pass the mic. There's another mic. Could we get that down here, actually? That would be amazing. So just to say that one of the lovely things about the RSE, of course, and this festival is about ideas and knowledge. And this is obviously therefore a perfect setting to be talking about how we shape our cities and how to do that in an intersectional and feminist way. So, you know, we know this is part of a growing discussion, a growing conversation, and many in this room will be, you know, part of that. We'll all be in different stages in a journey about thinking what a feminist city looks like and feels like. And why it's important we talk about cities is given, you know, where we are, we understand that cities are kind of the vehicles and the places in which we are most likely to be able to address some of the key issues and challenges of our time, such as the climate emergency and so forth. So, you know, bringing together this panel to talk about that is really, really exciting. And what I'm going to do is, our lovely panelists tonight all are working in quite in sort of parallel ways around this theme. And if you don't mind, I'm actually just going to read out short biographies for each of them, just to give you like a fuller understanding of these amazing women and their work. So firstly, we have Dr. May East. May is a really inspirational international urbanist specialising in nature-positive and gender-sensitive cities. And we've been fortunate to meet, particularly over the last year. I've been learning a lot more about May's work. She works internationally. You know, for example, she's a UNITAR fellow, working regeneratively with 20-minute neighbourhoods, mining cities, and informal settlements around the world. Many of you'll know she recently published her book, What If Women Designed the City? Oh, it was up on the screen, but it's gone now. That we were holding that in the picture, which explores a set of symbiotic relationships between women and the cities they live and work within. May was awarded Woman of the Decade in Sustainability and Leadership by the World Economic Forum in 2019. So thank you, May. We round of applause. Thank you. Lovely. And next in the centre here, we have wonderful councillor Holly Bruce. Again, councillor is actually a trained law graduate, and you worked with Patrick Harvey, didn't you, in his office, MSP's regional office, since 2019. You'll know that in 2022, Holly ran a record-breaking campaign to become an elected councillor at Glasgow City Council. She's one of the youngest women to serve on the council and is Vice Chair of the Environment and Livable Neighbourhoods Committee and Chair of the Glasgow Violence Against Women Partnership. Holly is an inspiring intersectional leadership feminist activist who's played a key part in the 2021 Young Women Lead Research Report, Glasgow, a Feminist City, and we'll hear more about that in a second. She successfully passed the motion that she raised in October 2022 to commit Glasgow City Council to embed feminist town planning approach in the city development plan, which is really incredible, and we're starting to see so much of that coming through in the work in the city since then, so that's incredible, so thank you. And of course, last but not least, Professor Suzanne Ewing. So Suzanne, we've known each other for quite some time, which is great. And Suzanne is Professor of Architectural Criticism at the University of Edinburgh. She was head of the school there of Architecture, Landscape Architecture and Landscape Architecture between 2016 and 2018. Her research and teaching aim is to activate the role of information through a repertoire of spatial, material and visual techniques for rigorous action and collaborative practice. Since 2008, she's been on the steering group of the Architectural Humanities Research Association and was co-editor of the academic journal Architecture and Culture 2012 to 2023. And we're also fortunate to work together as well in the Voice Experience Project, which we co-founded some time ago, so we'll hear about that as well, no doubt. So thank you, Suzanne, thank you. So just to kick us off, I mean, there's so much we could talk about. This is such a huge topic, and there's so much to talk about. We can't cover everything today, but what we did think to get us going, we've actually asked every member of the panel to bring an object that might, tell a story about their lines of inquiry, the things that interest them around sort of feminist cities and making of our cities. So shall we start with me? Do you want to start?
I can. Yes. Can you listen to me? Okay, great. Well, I changed my object this afternoon, so I haven't prepared, so I'm going to tell a story. And this is my object. It's a piece of wood from a tree called Palo Santo that grows in the Pantanal of Brazil. I'm a British-Brazilian international urbanist working with human settlements in the most different scales, from cities to towns to villages, to tribal villages, to indigenous villages, slums, mining cities. And most recently, I have been asked to support a group of women working and living in the Pantanal area. This today is every year we hear that is the historic drought that is happening in Brazil with fires. There's big fires taking place in Pantanal. Pantanal is the size of Belgium of biodiversity with so many animals, and is being burned. And that's where this tree grows. And this tree grows there. And women are asking me, Meg, how can we protect this wood? Because for them it's really important. It gives the resin, a black resin, that they paint their ceramic. These are the Cadwell women. So I've been Skyping and WhatsApping and see how can we support you to get the seeds of this tree and protect, because being burned. And we just realized a few days ago that actually this tree is rhizomatic. Although they have some seeds, it doesn't grow from seeds, it grows from inside. So we cannot protect because it's about growing from inside. And I was preparing for this talk here and just realized, oh God, what's happening with this conversation of gender-sensitive placemaking all over Europe and in Scotland, in UK, is rhizomatic. It's happening everywhere. There is not a center, there's not somebody that has launched that book that is the most important book. It's rhizomatic. It's time. We know that, many publications that came over the last 10 years from international knowledge brokers like World Bank, EU'd back. They have nothing to do with women and cities. And they have published and saying, listen, cities have been designed and planned by taking men's reference or men's experience as reference. Therefore, cities work better for men than they do for women, children, older people, all levels of ableness and gender identities. So bridging the urban planning gender gap, it's something that's happening right now in a rhizomatic way.
Fantastic. Maybe we'll go to Suzanne and then we'll come to you, Holly. I'm just going to mix it up a bit.
Okay, well, I absolutely love that, May. I think the rhizome is an amazing image, but mine is a more conventional object. Mine is actually a book, but it's actually part of this rhizome. And this is a book by Elizabeth Wilson, who was born in 1936, and she has written this book, The Sphinx in the City. And I bought it in 1993, just after I'd finished studying. And I think I was at a point where I was beginning to think, where's my place in the world? Starting to read things which are a bit more opening up bigger questions than just learning about architecture and how you might make things. And what I love about this book, it's about urban life. So it's really fascinating. And I sort of found this kind of amazing connection. I partly liked it because it's got a section about Glasgow in it. And I was living in Glasgow at that time. And so a number of reasons why I selected it. I think it's, a book is, you think, oh, it's another book, But she has really opened up, the titles of the sort of chapters, we've got things like Sublime, Cesspool, Dreams, even Sphinx, Labyrinth. And it's sort of like the city is a world of desires and needs. And for me, that sort of world of the imagination that I sort of partly continue to do now when working with sort of students and research and things, it really resonates. And, she's claiming that the city is of contrasts. It's really amazing. And that richness is something that we shouldn't erode. So there's something about that richness. And there's a couple of things I really like about this book, which is part of that world, is that it's not just words. It's got some amazing images in it. And those images are taken from references from film, from novels, from, imaginaries. And they're documentations. There's an amazing photograph of women in the Gorbals in the 60s, which we've sort of seen lots of images of. And she's foregrounding others in the city. So what is the experience of others? And she writes really beautifully about, there's a chapter in here, where she writes about the history of planning, which very much built in what you were talking about, May, this idea of difference between male and female. So when the suburbs developed, when the garden city developed, there were very clear ideas about the role of women and men in society, and they were built into how our cities developed. So, and, she basically writing before 2000, so it's quite a long time ago, but she's talking about Glasgow as a city that is not industrial anymore, but it's about entrepreneurship. And that's the state we're in now, where it's we're a financialized, we've got lots of drivers which are, maybe we can't see, but they're really important. And the other reason why I've chosen this is because it's got 12 pages of bibliography. And for me, nothing is ever, using the rhizome, maybe another analogy as a hinterland, nothing ever comes from nowhere. There's always a world of resources and sources, and we all operate like that. And I think acknowledging that, and the fact that I can now in 2024 go back and go, gosh, that's amazing. And she's looking at Angela Carter, she's looking at all these amazing novelists, she's looking at scholars, she's got philosophers, and it's a resource to go back to. So that's one of the reasons I chose that.
And Holly.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Similarly, I've brought a book, but it has been more of a catalyst than anything else. So this book was sent to me during lockdown. I'm sure a lot of people in this room went to arts and culture and books during that time as a means to learn and to kind of zone out from what was going on in the world at that point. And it was sent to me, I joined a radical book publisher called Verso, and they did like a book club, and you kind of ticked your favorite subjects, and one of mine was politics, feminism. And so I was randomly sent this book. Some might say that's fate. But I was randomly sent this book, and I started reading it, and it really blew me away. So I was sitting in my flat in the south side of Glasgow, 2020, not able to get outside, but really reflecting on my experience as a young woman in the city. At the time, I was 26, so I just finished my master's, had just got my first job outside of my master's. And so really, the city for me at that time, all being locked down, was not ideal. I mean, it wasn't ideal for anyone. But this book really, really spoke to me. And it speaks about a number of things. It talks about being, one of the chapters is about the city as one. And at that time, I was living on my own as a young woman. And it got me thinking about how I am mobile or immobile at this time. Also got me thinking about safety and how being out at night on my own for a walk, as we were all allowed to do at one point during lockdown, was sometimes unsafe for me. So it really sparked a lot of interest in the subject. I went through this book before coming here because I knew I was going to take it as my object. And I've absolutely underlined almost everything in this book. I don't know if anyone else does that. It's not very helpful. But there was one part that I did underline that was under the City of Friends chapter, which I'm going to read out. It's only a short bit. And the reason why I'm reading out is because it's underlined and got little bits and it says OMG. So I think that was like my moment of this is something. So it says, if women, Indigenous people, people of colour, queer and trans folks insist on valuing and recentering relations that have been systematically undermined, the status quo inevitably tilts in ways that are frightening and fantastic. This is a huge step toward the feminist city, the city that values women's relationships, decenters the nuclear family, and lets women and girls take up space and make relations on their own terms. And I was like, whoa. So after this, the reason why this was a catalyst is that I then was inspired to start a campaign. I joined the Young Women's Movement, which originally was called the Young Women's YWCA, now known as the Young Women's Movement. And we did a campaign in Glasgow, which Jude referred to in the opening, which listened to or spoke or gathered research from over 600,000 young women and non-binary people within Glasgow, all under the age of 30. And we put a survey out at the time, so this is 2021, we couldn't be in person, and we've got a wealth of responses, probably more than your average council consultation. And we, in that research, came out and had a report that had 28 recommendations that we put towards Glasgow City Council. But in that report, there was 4 core themes that kept coming out, which was safety, accessibility, convenience, and affordability. Those were the 4 things that just kept coming out no matter what the subject matter. So when I was elected in 2022, I then was like, right, I've done this campaign, I've done this whole research project ultimately in the city that I'm representing. It would be silly if I didn't use that as a means to change policy. So then, as Jude alluded to earlier, I passed a motion in October 2022, which hopes to embed, well, it doesn't hope, it's currently underway, embed a feminist town planning, a gendered lens to the city development plan. So that's my journey, and we'll unpack that going forward.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Feminist City. Leslie Cairn, Leslie with an IE at the end.
Holly did threaten, is that the right word? She said she's going to sit here and read the whole book to us in the audience today, which would have been amazing as well. So as you can see, thanks again for those introductions, and I hope you've got a little flavor of the conversation to come. Last summer, Jude, we hosted a similar kind of panel. I think Holly, yourself, and Suzanne, you were there, and we thought we probably would have maybe 10 people come along and listen to us talk about what a feminist city could look like. And we had over 80 people who were interested. And we were blown away last summer by the conversation. We explored themes. We talked about status quo. We talked about safety and access and movement within the public realm. We talked about agency and empowerment and decision-making. inclusion, intersectionality, contradictions, methods, strategies, how you develop tools. It was such a rich conversation. I think today we thought, with all of us here in the room and those watching us online, we could build on some of those themes and we could start to, I think before the event when we were talking about this, we talked about, maybe this is our opportunity to explore how we can create the conditions for all of us here in this room to imagine what a feminist city would look like. So I think with that, it would be really good to kind of open the conversation up to yourselves. You've told us already how, there's the significant actions and steps that you've taken towards the work that you've been doing. And it'd be interesting to explore a bit more about, the swell of activity that is happening across Scotland. May, as you said, I love this analogy that you just talked about. Why do you think that this conversation is happening in Scotland just now, and what do you think we can draw from that?
I can go first. So for me, obviously, I come from a policy setting angle and city councils and how we go about creating policy and change. And when I'd submitted the motion in October 2022, I didn't think for 1 second that there would be this wealth and or this sense of support and love for the subject and need to explore it more. I had many different types of people get in touch with me. Jude got in touch with me as an architect. I've had artists, I've had academics, I've had people within construction, within planning, within research. It's really been incredible, and the response I'd never imagined would have happened with that kind of what I thought was quite a policy-orientated motion that no one would quite understand. But it really spoke to a lot of people, and I think the reason why it spoke to people is because I used the term feminism. I think if I had went in, and this was a choice that I made as a feminist and as through the work that I did with the Young Women's Movement, I really think that word captured a lot of people's hearts and really empowered people to create change. And if I'd said gender inclusive planner, if I said something else, I don't think for 1 second the media would have picked this up as being a big news story. It would have just been seen as a research academic-y thing that is important, but are not news stories usually. So it was a conscious decision to use that word feminism for that purpose, for it to be heard, and also to root it in what it is, which is equality, which is intersectional feminism. And ultimately, feminist cities, as we all know, and from all the research, as May alluded to earlier, and Jude, it's for everyone. Applying a feminist lens doesn't take away anyone's rights. It empowers people, it empowers everyone. So that is my kind of story and how, for me, it grew and became this beautiful thing, which I now have friends around the table that I can talk to about this because my colleagues are sick of me going on about it all the time. And we need all these people, as we keep saying, we need everyone around the room in all different areas of society to stand up for this.
I could follow on a bit. I suppose I find it really interesting. I've had I'm speaking from a position of real privilege, I've had a really good education, lots of opportunities. I've got privilege of doing lots of interesting things now with work, but that has not been a situation that's been the same situation for the last 50 years or going back. And I think the more and more I've gone through sort of situations of work, you start to realise and understand that there has been a story, that there has been, rights are not just gained, they're fought for. And I think there's a sort of whole history of women's movements that are really vital. They happen differently in different places. And so certainly from the sort of UK perspective, there's a very particular history of women's movements across what that means for education, for work particularly, but also then in the world of architecture, which is the one I suppose I mostly occupy, and architectural education. There's also a parallel story of what that means for, what you can do within it and what the experience of that is. And I was going to say, we're sitting in Edinburgh, so anyone who hasn't been to the Women in Revolt exhibition at the National Gallery, it's absolutely amazing. And I suppose, I'm learning. You have to learn about these histories. You have to really understand them. And this amazing work, which is now with a bit of distance, looking back. And one of the things I really found amazing in that exhibition is the film footage of the women in the cities dancing, because they're deciding their protest is more effective if they're slightly inflecting, they're not shouting, they're not being really sort of difficult, but they're kind of inflecting a way of drawing attention to how you might experience the city differently. And there's so many layers to what's going on there.
I've been to the exhibit. I saw it in London when it was there originally, and there's so many different pockets of it that's like different themes depending on what you like about feminism. There's like the punk movement, there's the socialist movement, there's the working class movement, parents. It's like there's whatever interests you. I'm interested in them all, but it really is amazing.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, without sort of labelling things as waves of feminism, that was a really significant moment. It's really affected, I think. So, for instance, in scholarship, there's been Elizabeth Wilson was writing early 1990s, but all the work that went on post that time, the 1970s, 80s, builds material. And I think there was a lot of work there that's had a huge impact and has a longer tail. But the recent swell, I think, has got to do with digital connectivity. And it's got to be this capacity where, as an individual, you can have a conversation with someone across the world. You suddenly go, we've got something in common, or we're experiencing the same thing. And I think that's kind of where we're at and why we've got a swell of different kinds of communities, different kinds of actions working together. Again, quite decentered.
I'm just going to do one little segue to that, is that in terms, I was talking about the kind of the media response to the motion, and it was predominantly all the media attention came from women. People that are leading the way in this are women, and I think that's really special. And I think that goes to show just how much people need and want this right now, especially women.
Well, I think what I would like to add is that when I engaged in this conversation, I made one decision of not using an old map to explore a new territory, which meant that despite the fact that cities have been built historically by using men's experience as a reference, particularly since the cities have been bombarded, First and Second World War, and we needed to rebuild them, and modernism, and Le Corbusier, and zoning, and all of those things that we know, we do not hold a zero-sum universe perspective, which means that women's increased protagonism in shaping cities means other genders are losing out. Instead, we are proposing what I call a co-evolution mutualism perspective, where women work with men to redistribute power, to balance representation, and also to change legal and planning systems together. So by working with this co-evolving mutualism perspective, where women and cities are implicated in the construction of one another, you're already using a new map to explore new territories. It's not like women gain more protagonism and men are losing. No, we are rebalancing power. And I think that's the difference right now from all those movements, because they have paved the way for us to be able to have deep conversations right now into designing cities that work for all.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. And I think those observations about the mutualism, that word that you use, I think that's really, really powerful. And I think one of the things we're quite keen to explore a little bit is that, you know, we've had different, we've been having these conversations, others in the room, you'll have been having your own. And it's something that you said, me, about, you know, how do we sort of continually move the conversation forward? So we're always like exploring new territories together. And I was thinking, you know, how thinking about, you know, all the resources, all the potential, all the writing, all the activity, all of this energy that's happening, how do we kind of go deep into that and join, you know, what are the things we might do to go that little bit deeper and to join up and link and feed all this energy so that we can harness, you know, bring it to its full potential. Does anyone want to respond to that?
I can go for it.
You go for it.
Well, I have done a recent research and book where I work with 274 women. So using new maps to explore new territories. So was about seeing women as experts of their neighborhoods. So 274 women from both affluent and hard-to-reach neighborhoods of Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Perth. And out of that, I created an app. I had this huge kind of amount of data, spatial data, visual data, audio data, and I did use a framework developed by Donella Meadows. She's an environmental scientist. Donella Meadows said there are small things in a system that sometimes you can press those, like an urban acupuncture, that can make big changes. So out of conversations with women, seen as experts of their neighborhoods, I organized these 33 leverage points, which are small things you can do in urban systems that cities can start working for. And from these leverage points, you have all sorts of leverage points. You have some that are parameters, are numbers, like measuring the amount of space that you have in your city dedicated for competitive sports, comparing to land that is for non-competitive sports, and then dedicating numbers, budgets that you're doing in Glasgow and Lyon is doing, feminization of sports by just looking at the budget. So you can work with parameters. Many people those cities that are emerging as examples of feminist cities like Vienna, they also work a lot with infrastructures about lighting, pavements and all of that. But then you have other you can work with rules of the system and who have power over the rules. You can work with mindset, feedback, there's lots of layers to start seeing how a feminist city can be embodied.
And I love that because I remember the walks that you did, and in my previous role with City of Edinburgh Council, we were lucky enough to work with you, May, and have you lead those walks, and so much of that conversation enriched the work that was happening within the city. So that was brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose we went on a walk. When was it? Was it last week or the week before?
2 weeks ago.
Not just any other walk, one of May's walks, which are great. So we're working with the Scottish Government on young planners, kind of like a workshop for young planners, and teaching them different tools on how to create cities that are livable and gender inclusive. And we went for a walk in my neighbourhood, which is Langside in Glasgow. Don't know if there's anyone from the south side of Glasgow here. Give us a whoop if so.
Maybe
There's
online.
one.
Maybe online.
Hi, you might know what I'm talking about then. So yeah, we went on one of those walks, and it was really, really excellent. And there was about 40, maybe 50 people turned out, and it was a dreary Thursday evening, rain, it was dark. But the way of gathering that data is so organic, like taking a survey or going to a workshop with a wee post-it note sometimes doesn't cut the mustard. I'm sorry, it's not very imaginative. So I think different ways, I think what May's doing in terms of consulting with people and different ways of imagining that is so important, and you wouldn't get in other settings. So that was really magical that night. I was very taken aback by the amount of people that turned out, so that was really great. From my side of things, in terms of councils and how they operate, as I mentioned earlier, there's many a consultation that happens in councils, and there's many assessments done on policies. And one thing I'm seeing within councils is how we adequately assess policies that are passed before they're passed. And there might be people within local authorities in here tonight. Impact assessments might be your worst nightmare, but they're so important. And what drives an impact assessment is the data underneath. And right now, I don't see Glasgow City Council being able to connect the kind of data with cross departments and how things operate. So one thing that came out of the motion is that we've now got a feminist urbanism working group, which is essentially officers in the council that are leading on whatever portfolio, whether that's transport planning. There's cross-party councillors. There's equalities leads, all in this one place and as a vehicle for change. So that the data and everything is accessible to one another so that we can really see a proper systems change. Because as we keep mentioning, it's not this subject isn't just one person's portfolio, it's everyone's portfolio. This mic keeps... Do you know what? I'm just going to leave it there and just let it hang out. It's fine. It's because I'm wearing a dress and no pockets. But it's not only one person's thing. There's a lot of times when there's policy or there's things passed, people want to grasp onto it and be like, this is mine, I own this. And like I could have easily just been like, this is mine, I've owned this, I passed this motion, therefore I'm not going to work with anyone else. That's not how you create good policy, it's not how you create good laws. So I think it's amazing that, as I said, these people around the table now, I would say, are my friends. They might not say the same about me. But the fact that we're sharing resources, we're sharing the burden, as often women do, and creating and sharing data is so important to drive this forward, because it doesn't take one person, it takes a whole system to change how we build cities.
Absolutely, and I would add to that, it's not just one person, it's not one profession either.
Yes.
And this is where, I mean, how many times have I, you say, hello, I'm an architect. Oh gosh, this doesn't work. Who's done that? And you think, we have nothing to do with that. And actually understanding the context of how power and influence works, I think is one thing that even having this conversation is so important, because again, it's that sort of knowledge that can empower. We have many different roles. We have relations, we've got knowledge and expertise of the city, how we live in it, how we work in it. We've got work things, etc. So I think that's really important to think about as well. So planning, I think, is super interesting. And I think it could evolve, but it's not just planners who are at stake. It's not just the council, it's how everything. So this is amazing, because we've got people from, methods, policy, sort of knowledge, coming together. And it's how we make that work that's really important, I think.
There was something you talked about before as well, Suzanne, is about like translation, like us being translators, like learning to speak each other's language so that we can have these shared conversations. We're talking to like flood engineers, and they use particular language, and we use particular language in architecture, and it's like, how do we find those common ways to talk to one another?
It can make you quite vulnerable, because fundamentally you're protecting expertise. You've got knowledge, and that knowledge is being used. But if if you're not right, or you ask questions, it can maybe there's those negotiations, I think, which are important just to build shared work.
And that balance of cooperation and also a degree of disruption, I think is kind of interesting, isn't it? That tension. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think for me, there's something really interesting about, as this conversation has grown and as it has spread across disciplines and across different, different ages, there's lots of young people reaching out saying, what can we do? How can we start? How can we get involved in this? We set up a LinkedIn group, for example, and there's so much interest in this. So be good to understand from yourselves what advice you would give to people who want to get involved in this, and at whatever level they feel they can. What do you think would be, from your experience, your advice you would give?
I wouldn't be advice, but I would say some awarenesses that could be important if you're starting the journey. The first awareness, I think, is about levels of work. There are different levels of work. There's an inner outer in the systems, I would say. So it's like sometimes you need to work in yourself, like what you're doing during the pandemic, reading and building yourself. Then there's the outer work, which is then start working with people and projects. And then there's the systems work, which is working with people and projects to shape and shift systems. So you need to know and sometimes you work on the 3 levels simultaneously or separately. So know which level you're working is important. The second one is about direction of travel. We know that sustainability is not enough. How can we sustainably bring back something that we already lost? So here we need to bring a regenerative approach. How much, whatever you're doing, whatever level of work, how much life, vitality and viability you're bringing to the system so that the built environment can co-evolve with ecological systems that's supporting us. So that's really important. And working regeneratively is very much about working with lifelines, not with deadlines. So that's really important if you position yourself into this direction of travel. And the third awareness, so first awareness, levels of work, 7 direction, and the third of one, I think it's very much about mindset. I would say that bridging the historic urban planning gender gap is not a problem to be solved. It's a potential to be unleashed. Why we start working as a problem to be solved? Problem to be solved is looking backwards. Potential looks forward. Problem looks backward. So here we are looking at, unleashing the potential, and the potential is rooted, grounded in what I call, I know it's a big academic, but it reflects a reality. The potential is always rooted in the biocultural, spatial uniqueness of place. I would say the potential of landside is not in Drumchapel. It's in landside. Potential is always in the uniqueness. So pay attention in the uniqueness of place and build in what's strong, not what is wrong, because that's the regenerative way. So these are the three awarenesses.
It was actually you introduced me with the strong and not wrong, and we actually used that today in a session, so thank you.
But I think borrowing and acknowledging is brilliant. We're always learning, and that it sort of it informs and it makes things more able to move forward. You're able to move forward, so it gives you a sort of a way to unleash.
But I was going to say go with what's strong, not wrong, because that to me was something I learned from May, and I really took away into my line of work as a counsellor. I often get people that come to me with problems, which I have to solve, which I love doing. I'm a problem solver. But often when it comes to potential of places, you should really be looking at what's strong and how can we expand that? How can we make that more beautiful? Or how can we multiply that in spaces? So I think that's a really, really nice kind of motto and value that I've learned, and I think might speak to you as well. I also was going to say, very simply, so what you've learned, maybe you've learned something today, maybe you've not. I'm hoping you've learned something. But what you bring this to your everyday lives. So outside these walls, learn about this alternative, this utopia, you could say, on the ground. So your next commute to work, see if the bus is on time. Is it comfy for you? Is it accessible for you? If you're on a nighttime run, is it through the park? Is it dark? Is it scary? Just think about and use your senses and spaces that you go about in the city and be like, actually, do I feel okay here? Am I welcome here? And I think that's a good starting point. And thirdly, I would just say, and I said this at another event I did, and this is a very counsellor thing to do, but join a community council. It sounds boring, and it sometimes is, but at the moment, community councils are a statutory body. They have powers in planning. It's unfortunate that you're not paid. I don't get paid a lot as a counsellor either. I've got another part-time job that I have to do, and so that requires community councils are often the same types of people that run them. But we really want to diversify the base of people that go and join community councils, because you are statutory footing, and you are always consulted on by planners, and you're always listened to. Ultimately, you're supposed to be listened to. So join a community council if you can. Thank you.
That's brilliant. I mean, I'm not sure if I've got that such articulated, but I think a couple of things, and one is absolutely personal experience really important. It's really important to connect it with knowledge that's out there. But I think if you are prepared to respect and learn from someone else's experience who's very different from you, or you might see, I think is a way to actually just really build genuine understanding in some way. So that was one thing I think. So how do we get access to that, I suppose is my question. I would say in the space of education, although it's getting more homogenous, that's one opportunity where we can perhaps nurture spaces for those things to happen. So it's a challenge, I suppose, for educators, for people who are thinking about how you construct and frame a project or an exercise or something. Do you allow that to happen, or are you just sort of keeping the status quo going? What are those assumptions? And I think my other thing, which relates to the Voices of Experience work that Jude and I are both involved with, and things like these outputs, which we love doing, is follow hunches and creative approaches are really productive. I think we've found that really extraordinary, just to sort of test things out, learn from others who are working differently. And, those creative ways of working, thinking differently can be brilliant and break deadlocks.
Finding those moments where you can sort of move in or communicate something in a way that you maybe aren't through your, for example, in architecture, we find it quite difficult to have these conversations in some areas. So, by doing like a publication with remnants, with poets and artists, and thinking differently about that and communicating ideas of the city in a different way, I think has unlocked us to actually talk about architecture more freely. So it's strange how it's...
And it surprised us how, the audience, we had no idea that people were interested. And you're not just speaking to the people and that's been really good.
Stepping outside your echo chambers, isn't it?
Echo chambers.
And using your own, if finding the agency that you do have and where you can influence. So, for example, in our practice, we're starting to, in our strategy team, stop using certain words. We had an event talking about this last week. Stop saying master plan. Just stop using it. Or man-made. Just find different, because you can see other things, neighbourhood plan, strategic plan. There's so many other words you can use. So it's finding.
I always remember. Actually, that's another thing I always learn all the time. But the event we did with the Scottish Government, you said to change the word from building environment or built environment to repairing.
Yeah.
One.
Instead of always building, you think about repairing and caring and looking after and just finding, just shifting just those things that maybe unlearning some of the things that we've been taught before. And it doesn't mean that those were, you disregard them, but you'd find other ways, perhaps, finding other ways. So that's good. So one of the things that, coming back to this, the theme of curiosity. One of the things, this is just a really, really simple question actually for you all, which is, what are you, in thinking about other people's work, and you've been so generous tonight in referencing other people's work and things that have inspired you and people you've worked with, but just to build on that a little bit more, what are you finding surprising or curious or inspiring about other people's work that you're seeing around this topic of feminist cities? And yeah.
Do you want me to go first? So it's very interesting because when I was thinking about that, I was thinking, there's work I'm going to mention, but I was actually, one of my curious questions is how helpful is feministicity going to be as a term? Because for me, and I think in discussions with people who might not say they're feminists or they're not on board in a similar way, it's about a good city, a city that's better, that's richer, that's kind of manages difference, is exciting, is good urban life. And we've got dwindling resources, so there's lots and lots of challenges. And I think I'm really curious, so from a sort of nurturing professionals, people who work in practice, what is the planning discipline going to become? So I'm really interested because it sort of went through, it was invented, in the UK, it became a sort of thing, there's lots of reconstruction and, there's lots of activity that went on over the sort of 20th century. It sort of dwindled as something to do, and yet we need it more, we need that activity more than ever. So I'm kind of really interested in what that becomes. How is it more sphinxing? How is it more complex? How does it bring other disciplines in? So it's not just the old tropes. And there are organisations like Open City in London who have done amazing things just about literally opening parts of the city so you can kind of feel you're engaged, you know about it, make space for girls, and the work you did with the Young Women's Movement. Those things I think are amazing public practice. Figuring out new formations of work to work together is what I'm curious
and
about.
We've got the architecture fringe as well here in Scotland.
Things like the architecture fringe.
People can come forward with their own ideas and explore that and push ideas forward. Anything you want to? What's making you curious?
What's making me curious? Everything.
I know.
When you asked me to speak at this, I was like buzzing. I love learning all the time. No, I think there's loads of different things. I mean, for me, the kind of next steps is ensuring that the city development plan is robust enough and does what the intention of the policy motion was, to make Glasgow the UK's first feminist city. So that is a long-term project up until 2027. Basically, the city development plan was up for renewal, and I seized that as an opportunity to pass this motion in 2022. So 2027 is the end date of that. So I need to make sure and be alert and curious at all times to make sure that that is robust enough. And I suppose for me, I'm always learning, and one thing that's really piqued my interest is the lack of public toilets and how important they are for cities. So I'm working with the council just now to develop a strategy to ensure that there are more of them and they're free and accessible to use for everyone. So I'm learning about public toilet stuff at the moment, which doesn't sound very glamorous, but it's so important. It's a public health issue, and have come across some resistance within my organisation, unfortunately, saying it's a novel. It's in vogue. It's on trend at the moment. No one will care about public toilets. Yeah, apparently no one goes to the toilet in past 2024. So yes, that's another thing. I'll maybe just leave it there and be inspired by other people's answers.
Me?
Well, as soon as we got the elections and we had this announcement in UK, there's going to be a whole new wave of development coming up. Myself and some other players from UK, we put together a letter to Keir Starmer suggesting that they take on board gender-sensitive placemaking approach as they start developing. And this was signed by architects, by developers, by academics, and also planners. And we sent this letter to Downing Street. It was just the beginning of the summer, and then we had the riots and everything. So I'm curious to see what is going to be the response. The letter is still open. We have 80 people signed. For those who are interested in joining and putting your signature, you can reach out towards me. But it's a very, very interesting. We put some principles that we would like them to consider in terms of active travel, safety, sense of place, and green spaces. So we put some suggestions there. It's an open letter. It's been published in the web, and we're waiting for the response. This means working with the rules of the system and also working with those. This is another level of working, which is with the rules of the system, and those who have power over the rules of the system is another leverage point that you can work when you start working with it.
Lobby, lobby, lobby.
Yeah, but also know your agency. I mean, I was thinking about that thing about, where those points, how you know that's the one, or I could do that, or someone else could do that.
I was just going to mention one more thing that I just remembered is also we referenced an event that we did with the Scottish Government a few weeks ago, but they are very keen on looking at the National Planning Framework 4 within the Scottish Government and seeing that through a gendered lens. The Chief Planner of Scotland, Fiona Simpson, is very, very interested and enthusiastic about this and is really on board. Part of our wee club. Nah, it's not exclusive. Anyone can join. But yeah, it's so that's really exciting. But I do think it's important that when that does come to fruition, that it's feminist cities or feminist villages or towns are not the same as one another. There's often a lot of reference to Vienna and Barcelona, and they're amazing in their own right, but there's not a blueprint for this, and it really goes down to talking to people on the ground and doing the work that May's doing, because that's how we inform how our cities should be built, is by the people who live in them, not by people elsewhere.
That's a lovely point to pause, isn't it, and open out to the audience, to questions. Those who are online, wow, it's lovely to see hands going up already.
Fantastic to see hands going up. That's brilliant. So I can see a hand here, and I can see a hand here. Could we...
Just to say,
you can use my mic. So can I just, because you're at the front, we'll come to you after this. Just pass.
And those who are online, if you don't mind putting your question in the chat, and our wonderful RSC colleagues will pick up the questions as well. So we've got some time, don't we? We've got time for about 4 or 5 questions. Absolutely.
Well, firstly, thank you very much for a really interesting discussion. Lots to think about. I wondered if you could say something. You all talked about getting involved and also working at systems levels. And I'm sure this will particularly resonate with the policymaker, that these things take time. And so if you could talk maybe a little bit about your strategies for like personal resilience or like community resilience, and when it comes to engaging and pushing for change, but not, I guess, running out of steam or getting downhearted when you don't see the change at the pace that you want. And also a point around pushing for progress rather than perfect. You know, I think that you mentioned utopia, but utopia is actually, the word means no place. Like, it's not a real thing. So, so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you kind of manage expectations while still encouraging people to engage and get involved.
Brilliant, thank you. Holly, did you want to take that first? And then
Yeah, I can do. No, I think it's a really good question, and it's something that I struggle with as a person who does this job part-time, 2.5 days a week, and did not anticipate this kind of swell of interest. It's become a part-time job in my part-time job. So I'm trying to be very firm with my boundaries and only doing the work that I'm able to do. For me, the expectations are set out in a long project plan of till 2027. So I've got time to kind of check in, and that is my goal, ultimately. That is what I can do in my position. I can attend events and speak about the subject and do all the rest of the nice stuff that I love to do. But that is what I'm paid to do and what my goal is, ultimately. So having really good boundaries is important. Saying no is okay, although I struggle a lot with that. And having, as I keep saying it, my friends, a good supportive network is really important as well. I won't use utopia again. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just a little bit, is I think we move more effectively with others. You know, energies dissipate, you know, might be sort of drawn down. I mean, we've certainly learnt that from Nicholas here as well. Sorry, I've just seen the work we've done with this Voice of Experience project, which has been working with intergenerationally with older women and younger women. You're very aware of different energies and different time scales. And I think we could make more of that. And we tend to work with peers very much in terms of how we operate professionally, how we operate with, you know, politics, etc. And that seems to me where we could tap into something, lean into each other. I've certainly found that incredibly supportive and hopefully, you know, mutuality.
brilliant, thank you.
Thank you guys so much for your time. I have been itching to ask this question, so I'm going to try to make it as coherent as possible. So we've seen in the past week, the Scottish Government has announced their major budget cuts and the programme for government. And I'm coming from an active travel transport background, and transport is one of the things that touches all of our lives. And for women's lives, being able to have autonomy and freedom in the places that we live, transport and walking to the bus stop, for example, or cycling, it's something that is a part of all of our lives. But I've seen a sudden 180 within the Scottish Government in the way that they're kind of considering transport, considering active travel. I've been working with local governments who have really gotten in the steam since 2020 of delivering active travel, thinking about a gendered lens, really thinking strategically and more inclusively. But suddenly it's getting cut. And we've seen a really dire funding situation. £1 billion is still being spent on trunk roads, which is predominantly by men, being used by men in mail transport. And what we have is crumbs, 220 million, which we still haven't been able to achieve. And that's just been cut by 27 million. So anyway, I just want to know what your thoughts are on recalibrating this system that is suddenly no longer using gender budgeting, and just, yeah, what are your thoughts? How are you feeling?
Thank you. It's a really good, a really important question, and one that's really close to my heart. I've been working within sustainable transport for over a decade now. Not anymore in Scotland, but it's such a difficult conversation when what gets pitted against each other is the environment and economy, and the social impacts of that. And my worry is that, at what point does the balance tilt, and who makes that decision about that tilting of economy versus environment versus the social impacts. It has to work, as you were saying, May, in that the systems approach. Yeah, I mean, I don't work within the Scottish context anymore, so I'm not aware of the specific conversations happening, but to me, there is a real imperative that we can come together and make sure that, that transport is seen through that lens of, who is using transport, who are the users, and what is it that we can do to collectively come together and make the case for that change that needs to happen now, especially as the climate emergency is not in the future, it's here, it's now. Your leverage points, May, just bringing it back to yourself. You talked about active travel within your book, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if women design the city, active travel will be adopted as a way of life. And streets will be made for people, and cars will be invited as guests. And many women would have this vision of fresh air routes where you can walk. Of course, you cannot evaporate traffic completely from one day to another, but traffic would be evaporated because cars would be as guests. And one of the things that connect active travel and safety as well, which is very minimal, that can happen with no money at all, just training, is, for instance, is to have buses, night buses, to stop on demand. This means stopping where you want. You just need Lothian buses having a training to say, you need to see if there's nobody, you stop. So I don't need to walk 3 blocks. And there's lots of little leverage points that women themselves, as experts of the active travel way of life, that have given. Another one was that is the realization of women that women cycle less than men. We walk more, but we cycle less. So why does it so? One of the reasons, there's safety things, there's infrastructure, there are all these levels, but there's one level that is about comfortable. It's not comfortable. Why? Because bicycles, the saddles, have been built using male body as reference again. So it's very interesting because it connects with your question. So how do you do? So you can do change in community level. So Portobello realized during these walk interviews that this was one of the leverage points, creating a library of women's fitting saddles so that women can try. When you're a mother and you have a baby and you go and you buy those slings and you try. So you go to a shop and you try this and that saddle, and then you start feeling more comfortable in your body and you cycle more. And there was this idea that emerged became a leverage point, and now if you go to Portobello, there is a saddle library for women. So leverage points are those things, small things that can change larger patterns.
I can come in briefly.
We don't need the hundreds and thousands of budget for that if we start listening.
I can come in quickly on that as well. In terms of my position as a councillor in Glasgow, I know that a large proportion of people in Glasgow don't own a car. A big proportion of that are women. So they do need to get about the city either by public transport or bike. Public transport in the city is too expensive and is run by buses are run by private operators. You've got a train network. The best intercity train network in Glasgow is in Glasgow outside of London. But we've just seen the scrapping or the reinstatement of the peak rail fares. So that's unfortunate to see. And I suppose the crux of your question is funding. And I think it's across the kind of political landscape, funding is scarce at the moment. And where I would come at it from is, well, where's the income generation? Where are we getting income from? And I would be proposing taxes on the climate polluters, the people that are polluting our planet the most, and increasing bans on millionaires, and a millionaire's tax, for instance. But unfortunately, a lot of those powers aren't within the gift of the Scottish Government, or definitely not in the gift of the councils. So there's ways of generating money that can help with that. And I don't think, as you says, the kind of pitching climate and policies with social or workers' policies against each other is not helpful. And we need to think about solutions-based thinking. But I do think public transport, that was in the Young Women Lead report, we focused on buses, and that was a huge thing that was in terms of accessibility and affordability. To go about Glasgow on a day ticket on a bus is just under £6. And that's just so unaffordable to so many people. And that came up time and time again until we get franchising and the rest of it. You're very lucky in Edinburgh with your Lothian buses. That is, and obviously we've got our under-22s bus travel, which is great. But yeah, there's a lot to be done in terms of the funding landscape. But public transport and active travel, women rely on a lot, and that needs to be part of the conversation. Lothian buses, are they here?
Well, the Chief Exec of Lothian Bus, Sarah Boyd, who is also fantastic, really interested in this topic. She texted me earlier saying she's watching, so she'll be pleased.
Hi.
There. She might be over at the back, Daisy.
No, she's...
Oh. No.
Oh, God.
Hi, I'm Shona. I work for a charity called the Women's Fund for Scotland. We're a grant-making charity, so that's why I'm here. But did you just say about if Lothian buses, their night buses, did stop on demand? Was it Lothian Bus Company you were talking about?
No, we're suggesting
just
any bus.
well, because yesterday Lothian Bus Company announced that they were partnering with StrutSafe. So that's someone that you can phone to stay in contact with if you're nervous about travelling on. So it seems like the ideal time to ask Lothian buses for their night buses to let women off at a stop that they request. So can Lothian buses do that?
Absolutely. Well, I was actually going to jump in on this because I've looked into this, and it's something
They've
about...
already signed up with StrutSafe. It's just another example.
I don't know, is she in the room?
Yes.
All right, sorry. I mean, in terms of my research,
The
I don't want to...
CEO of Lothian buses
don't want to
are
put
here.
her on the spot. It's an event. But the response I got from First Bus in Glasgow is that it's a Transport Commissioner decision to do that. I know that they do it in Canada. It's in Leslie Cairns' book as well. They actually introduced it in the 90s in Canada, and it was for women at night when they weren't feeling safe. And then post-COVID, they opened that up to everyone, regardless of gender or accessibility, because of the pandemic. So my response that I've received is it's a legal thing with the Transport Commissioner that needs to change to allow us to do that.
Right, so we don't necessarily want to take away bus stops. We just want permission in addition to stop when requested.
Yes.
And at night time, that should be easier because there's fewer cars on the road.
Yes, exactly.
So who
It's a
do we
no-brainer.
ask? It is a no-brainer.
Any more questions? Thank you for that.
Did you point to? Sorry, I didn't.
Okay, thank you. And then we'll come.
I'm going to do this one at the back. Sorry.
Hi there. I just wanted to tell you about an experience I had a really long time ago. I used to volunteer in London for the Fawcett Society. And one time, like this must be like 15 years ago or something like that, a family came up to me and there was women and girls. And they said they wanted more prayer rooms. And since then, this is the first time I've been able to speak to someone about that request from women in the city. And also, I was wondering if we could have those prayer rooms with loos, and maybe you could have a leverage point where you have both. Is there part of your public planning? Is that considered within the public planning?
Great. So your question, just to be clear, so the question is around incorporating prayer rooms in the city associated with toilets and just making that space within the city for those types of activities. Is that something that's come up, or has it come up through leverage points, or has it come from your discussions in the council?
It's a really good idea, and unfortunately, no one's came with it to me yet. In terms of the demographic of my ward is quite white and middle class, so probably why I've not had anyone approach me about that. But within cities, they're constantly redesigning public civic spaces, whether it be community centres or libraries. I can see space within those settings for prayer rooms. I think that would be a really nice addition. My own library alongside is getting remodelled. It's closed for the next 2 years, but I'm going to suggest that. So thank you.
Just add one thing, because I think I feel that there's something deeper about that question, which is about ideas of refuge and social infrastructure and places that you feel sort of safe. And there's a big question about where do we find that? And there's been some really interesting work done around libraries, actually, and observing how, I mean, we think about with the energy crisis, with things like warm rooms, how particularly for women and different types of women, they're sort of amazing infrastructures for everyday life. And we know that that's become eroded, and it's very difficult to quantify, you know, what they are. But it feels to me that's a sort of conversation that's falling between the cracks, because as you ask the question, whose responsibility is it, becomes what's sort of at stake. You know, a planner thinking about bridges and roads and budgets is not going to be doing that. But then an individual client for a building, it may not be part of the conversation as well. So I think this is where even just having the space to say, wouldn't it be great to have different types of safety and refuge in cities for different types of people, you know, would be really good. Not presupposing what people will want or that it's just pragmatic needs.
Fabulous. And May, you wanted to add to that?
Yes. Two thoughts here. First of all is that in my walk interviews, it became clear that for women, the vitality of the community is related to the possibility of having community centers, and places and community centers are associated to prayer rooms and bathrooms and all of that, depending which community you are. But when I was doing the walk interviews, I never wanted women to come up with a wish list of things that they wanted to happen in their neighborhood for the council to do, for Holly, to the in-tray of Holly, because she listens, so she have a huge in-tray. So I created a regenerative framework of inquiry to change completely the mindset. So the first thing that I would ask women would say, what is unique about your neighborhood? I wanted them to see the strong, not the problems. So what is unique about your neighborhood? Then you already start changing your mindset to say, okay, so what is the potential that hasn't yet been realized? Then you start working with the potential of safety, of active travel, or community buildings. And then from the potential, of course, you're not naive that every territory has only potential. So you always have restraints, maybe red tapes or lack of funding. You have restraints. But you welcome the restraints. You have a potential that has some restraints. So you talk to the restraints, you negotiate, and you create new lines of work. Once you have not, disconsider restraint, but talk to it and new lines of work, the next stage is to identify a network of responsibility. And that's the change from a time that we don't have any more money from governments and taxes and things, a network of responsibilities. And then you come and say, yeah, so you have business sector, NGO, this group here. So you start capillarizing the responsibility. And then I would go and say, what about your role? What's the role of women? Because then you turn that leverage point or that idea, or that something that it becomes a tool for your emancipation, and also a tool for you to become more aware how women can really shape and shift cities and being shaped and shifted by cities. So a wish list for the council is old map and old territory.
Can you just take the mic? Yeah, thanks.
As the council is changing their policy for what we allow within Edinburgh as a city, they're up with hotels and down with flats and things like that, which would obviously hit a different kind of demographic. So why don't we have an open lobby policy for these new hotels that we're building so we can have people wander in and use these strong potential leverage points. That might be a different way of looking at it, inspired by your very insightful points. Thank you so much.
Do you want to deal with this?
No, she's happy with it.
Pardon?
I think she's happy.
Yeah, I think you know what you're doing there is you're thinking of those solutions already. You're starting to do it. Yeah, which is brilliant. So we had a question. Thank you. And we had a question here. Yeah, thanks. Down the middle, and then there's another one up here, and another one here.
Questions from
We also have
the men in the room as well.
So the lady with the black top there. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for your time and your really insightful comments and all the work you've done. I've just finished university. I'm 21, and my last paper I did before finals was feminism and feminist theory in like a political philosophy sense. And my tutor told me I was quite cynical about my view on this kind of stuff. We talked about it in depth, and I wondered, obviously, the planning and what politicians do and the way we build our cities is very important, but also the kind of attitudes that go along with that. How do we go about changing attitudes? Like, not just like, obviously, it's a bunch of women and a few men here. Obviously, we have our attitudes. We want to change them and kind of push towards change in a really positive, kind of progressive sense. But how do we bring along other people with that, particularly men?
I could give maybe a tangible example of that. So one of the projects I'm working on alongside the City Development Plan is putting some lighting in a park in the periphery of my ward, which as a Green councillor, people were like, you're lighting up the park, what about the birds, what about the wildlife, what about... And that is obviously incredibly important. I'd be ousted out the party otherwise. We basically worked with an organisation called Green Space Scotland that looked at different aspects of the park that we could potentially light up to allow women access to that in the winter months when it's dark past 4 o'clock. The park that I use is an active travel route. It's actually the one that I used to get home from city centre, and it's linked up to all the beautiful infrastructure that like the Sustrands and the councils are putting in. But the reason why I'm talking about that is because yes, we can put the infrastructure in, yes, we can put in, so we've got some solar studs at the moment for wayfinding, but there's some areas that we could have larger lights put up. We could put those lights in and no one will go in. Everyone will still be afraid of going at that park. But how we can try and change that culturally is by having more things in the park during the evening. Events, whether it be running events, whether it be social events. We've got an amphitheatre in the park. There could be more cinema that they put on in the summer, in the winter, because the park is an accessible and free space. So it's, and personally, it was a place that I spent a lot of time in during the pandemic as well, and it's a healthy space. So yes, we can put the infrastructure, the lighting in there, but hand in hand, we need to try and change the cultural stigma that is parks at night are no-go zones, and change the narrative around that to have community gardening, running, socialising, and whatever it is that you like about the parks, having that at night as well.
Great. Yeah, so we're also aware we have some online questions as well. I know there's some more questions in the room, those of you put your hands up, but it'd be good to take a question from online first if we can. We've got a little bit of time still to do that.
Yes, I've got one from Kathy, who I think is hinting at, are we making sure that young people's voices are heard in this as well? She sort of specifically alluded to schools, but just I imagine young people amongst communities and who live in these cities and will potentially become the people using these cities for a long time.
Absolutely. Do you want to take this, young people, children?
I mean, we've referenced, there's an amazing organisation called Make Space for Girls, which is not actually quite sure of the origins, so you guys might know.
Actually, Susanna was talking to us today, actually, about this and the work that they're doing, and I think what's really important is, particularly with young people, is that we find the right mechanisms and landscapes within which to engage with young people, because obviously, I mean, in our work, we do a lot of engagement, but it tends to be, if you're in a hall or you're out in the street, you're only going to meet the people who are in those environments. And how do you actually meet with young people who are very unlikely to come to some of the things you will actually formally lay on? So I think, what Susanna was talking about was that, obviously schools are a great way in for young people, but it doesn't, it's not everything, that doesn't always hit every single demographic or group, and a lot of young people might not be engaging in school for particular reasons. So often, I often like to use the dental campaign that was used when they were trying to encourage, it was like the opposite, they were trying to get, adults to engage with their dental health and care, and so by getting the children into the dental system, that allowed the adults then to sort of take care of their dental health. And actually it feels like almost in terms of thinking about city making, place making, there's finding those events or those mechanisms or those ways where families are maybe coming, or carers are coming with young people as well, particularly that young age. But adolescence, it's all, what we were hearing today from A Place in Childhood, which is another organisation based here in Scotland, was they were saying that actually it's the time, taking the time, because young people particularly just assume that you might just having to talk to them. And it's building that trust with young people that you are genuinely willing to listen, and deep listening on their terms about what their needs are. And I think so it's finding new methods and tools to have those conversations and those ways of engaging. So I don't know if anybody wants to build on that.
I'm just going to do a further reading bit because I love my library. Colin Ward, A Child in the City, which was a really seminal book from the 70s. It's just like an amazing little view of thinking about the city through different eyes. And I just think, back to the question you were talking about, opportunity of playing in the city, treating it as an adventure. We are completely gentrified, and we've been normalised, and what it is to move on streets, to move through a city, and we can learn a lot, I think.
A lot of it's looking back to some of the work.
So looking back to that, a lot of it's got things about adventure playgrounds, it's got how kids learn together, how important it is to learn in environments to grow as a human being. So we actually need cities for emotional and social and, kind of human health.
And to value young people within that, yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to touch on the Make Space for Girls campaign, which is incredible. So they were born out of the fact that Susanna, she noticed that play parks in cities weren't built for girls in mind. They're predominantly built for young boys. So you'll see, like, in housing developments that go up, people just attach a mugga pitch, which is a multi-use games area, which is like, it's supposed to be for all different types of sports, but it's actually only good for football. A lot, and not to say that young girls don't play football. I play football. But a lot of young girls were coming back saying, that is not what I want to see in my parks. And there's a lot of other councils and places across the globe that are doing really innovative stuff. One thing I always come back to that was a piece that was co-designed by girls in Oxfordshire was a wooden bench. And it wasn't a bench, it was a round table like this, made out of wood that was painted in pastel colours, and it was sheltered. And it was something as simple as that. Girls wanted to go there. It was sheltered from the rain. It was a circle so they could talk to each other, because a lot of benches you see are just sitting like that and doesn't facilitate good conversation. Somewhere that they could read, craft, write, play card games. That for me is something so simple but so effective. And I find a lot of cities, it's no ball games, that kind of attitude back in the day where no ball games, you're not allowed to play here. Where are you going to play? Like, there's so many teenagers that are branded with antisocial behaviour, but there's nowhere for them to go. So it's unfortunate, and we need to start building play parks and spaces for young people. And within Glasgow, the Youth Forum have identified actually a skate park that's up for renewal. They were like, we need public toilets there. I was like, even kids are saying public toilets. But it's so interesting. And another kind of anecdote from my constituents is the bus travel for under 22s. So there's teenage girls in a neighbourhood in my ward who use that, but have stopped using it because of treatment that they've received on board buses by men. Catcalling, making them feel uncomfortable. And that is their right to be able to move about a city. They have that mobility. It was to give kids and teenagers the mobility to educate themselves, to socialise, to have that independence. And yet those girls are being frightened to go on board again. So there's lots of things that needs to be done. But yes, that would be my answer to that question.
Thanks, Holly.
Went off on a tangent.
Just conscious of time, we've got time for maybe one more question, and then we'll have a quick summary.
There's 2 hands up.
If you
both say your question
Yeah, and then we'll see how we can get both. Perfect.
Hi. Hi. Just a really quick question from me. So I work in infrastructure, and the leverage points I thought was a really interesting idea. Previously, we've chosen to invest in what we've called essential strategic infrastructure points, which may be, so if you can imagine an island community in Scotland and you have a very limited amount of money, how do you spend that money to keep the whole island going in a meaningful way, and working out with the community what the strategic essential infrastructure is. Say perhaps it might just be a single road that keeps the whole island moving is the way to spend the money the most wisely when you've got a limited amount of money. When you're thinking from those leverage points, I'd be interested in, it could just even be one word from everyone, is there a different approach to decision making or spending money that should be done to make sure that we can unlock some of those leverage points in the way that we work?
Thank you. While you're thinking about that one word or question, should we take the other question as well, and then we can see?
Thanks very much. I work in alcohol policy, and I was just curious about people's views on the nighttime economy and the lack of inclusivity and the rather kind of limited vision that we have, particularly for our city centres, that, you know, it's more licensed premises, that's the only game in town, you know, which is not inclusive of different ethnic groups and certainly not inclusive of women. Thanks.
Thank you. Did you want to start, Suzanne?
I don't think I've got a word. It's sort of, but I think what the first questions have described about that, kind of the importance of it. It matters. You know what I mean? That there's a sort of one chance to use a small what you have, and that has to be negotiated collectively. I mean, there's something about that respect. Maybe I'll say respect as a word. You know, so there's some respect for the decision being made, that it might have been made collectively, and then you hold it for a while. And you know, infrastructure is usually a very, very long-term thing. Sometimes it becomes obsolete very quickly with that huge investment. But those, for an architect, those obsolete become opportunities later. So sometimes the intention may offer other things. So, and just on the other bit, just because I live near an edge of Edinburgh, which is actually a free space in the sense it's slightly out with regulations. And what's really interesting is that it's an amazing mixture, not always easy, of people who can manage, you know, sort of, you know, it's inclusive in the sense that it's out with regulation a bit. You know, it's sort of on the edge of the water. You know, so I think that I don't know if that's really answering, but if we look for the places where I think we find them, we can find things like that, and then maybe they can be supported or noticed or carefully watched in a way that, you know, the legal sort of frameworks are set out to be about protection and risk and, you know, all that sort of stuff. How do we work in a slightly softer way?
Thanks, Suzanne. Holly, did you want to?
My brain is going. I think that was a really good word, respect. I think that encompasses a lot. And it kind of made me think back to the project I'm doing in Queen's Park in Langside, and pulling together everyone's needs. So the first thought I had was needs, because everyone has specific needs. And it's about not necessarily compromise, but coming to a collective agreement as to what is best for everyone. And we've managed to do that within the park with the lighting, which it took a while, but it was listening. And that's one thing in your book that I took away as well, is deep listening, the act of deep listening. Often, like, an hour and a half is a long time. I'd be like zoning in and out of this conversation if I was sitting. But, you know, like, deep listening, active listening is so important. Not just thinking about the checks and balances of your project, like actively listening. And on the... Oh, sorry. Go for it.
Just think, we have 1 minute left.
Okay.
I was wondering if...
More sober spaces.
More sober. I love that. Oh, yes, perfect.
More sober spaces.
Yeah. May, did you want to sum up within that 1 minute that we have before we say thank you?
Putting
you on the spot
as well. I would say that well, let's quote Rainer Maria Rilke, who said, "The future needs to enter you before it becomes reality." So today we talk of existence. So we can work in two levels here. We can work with existence, which is operating things, maintaining things, and we can also work across this threshold and work with the potential, which is improving and regenerating. All levels are important. We need to operate, we need to maintain, but I think the threshold that our generation is being invited is to start really bringing more life, more vitality, more viability, whatever is the size of the budget or the infrastructure. I always think, is this bringing more life, more vitality and viability, which means vitality over time?
Brilliant, thank you. I think that is a perfect point to end this wonderful conversation. For me, 1.5 hours has flown by. A huge thank you to the RSE for hosting us, for having us here at the Curious Festival. What a fantastic festival. And please, there's more information online for those who want it. Thank you to the audience, to those who are watching there for all the questions. And as you said, for 1.5 hours is a long time. So for being here and for participating. And thank you to this wonderful panel. Thank you so much to you.